Now to some heartbreaking news. Our nation saw its deadliest mass shooting in years when a Louisiana man shot and killed 8 children this morning. Tonight, we're learning more about that gunman, Shamar Elkins, who was the father of 7 of those 8 slain children. Tonight, the community of Shreveport has been left shattered. The children, 3 boys and 5 girls, ranging in age from 3 to 11.
Police say the crime scene spans 2 houses. It ended when officers opened fire on the gunman during a police chase. Eyewitness News reporter Tim Pulliam is live now with new details tonight. Tim?
Liz Jory, we now know the names of the 8 kids shot and killed, and we're also learning that the shooter had ties to the military and was known to police. This is a Facebook image of the Louisiana man law enforcement believe is a cold-blooded killer. Shreveport police identifying him as Shamar Elkins, the alleged gunman who shot and killed 8 kids. At least 7 of them were his own flesh and blood. The coroner released their names, a total of 7 siblings and a cousin ranging in age from 3 to 11. Jayla, Shayla, Kayla, Layla, Markaden, Soraya, Kedarian, and Braylon. Neighbors mourned their deaths at the crime scene.
This is not a freaking joke. This is real, and this is the result when someone snaps.
Police are still trying to determine what motivated the shooting. The attack began before sunrise when police say the suspect shot a woman at one home and then drove to another house to unleash more violence.
The gray house is the house in which 7 children were located inside that were deceased. There was an additional deceased child that looked like he had tried to escape the residence out the back on the roof.
Officers say a second woman was shot and is believed to be the mother of the suspect's children. Both women are now in the hospital in critical condition. Officers fired at the suspect during a chase after he carjacked the vehicle at gunpoint. ABC News reporting the 31-year-old joined the Louisiana National Guard in 2013 and served 7 years without being deployed. The shooting took place in House Speaker Mike Johnson's district. He offered thoughts and prayers to the family. The shooting impacting people beyond Louisiana. The mayor of Shreveport highlighting that in his statement that reads in part, "Tragedy like this does not belong to one family alone. It belongs to all of us. Today, our community is grieving the unimaginable loss of innocent children. There are no words that can make sense of it and no distance that shields us from it."
Take out this evil out of our nation, out of our parish, out of our city, out of our lives, God. We know mental illness is real, God.
This attack considered one of the deadliest mass shootings in Louisiana. The community asking for prayers.
This community needs you. I need you. Because how do we get through this?
According to the FBI, domestic violence crimes are up. Between 2020 and 2024, law enforcement reported more than 11,000 domestic violence murder victims. In this case, investigators are still trying to figure out what led up to this shooting. Tim Pulliam, ABC 7, Eyewitness News.
Tim, thank you. If you or someone you know needs help in regards to domestic violence, there are resources available. You can call 1-800-799-SAFE or text the word START to 88788. Help is available 24/7 and in multiple languages.
So I wanted to talk.
Black men, I'm just checking in. Y'all quiet in the mug about the 8 children that was unalived by their black father in Louisiana. Y'all were so quick to talk about Ashlee Jenae being unalived by a YT man, allegedly, because that hasn't come out to be proven yet, you know what I'm saying? However, what about this man right here who went on a unaliving spree of his 8 freaking children? I have yet to see a lot of y'all problematic men come out to address this situation. And I honestly know why y'all don't address situations like this. I honestly know why. Because you know darn well that it makes BLK men look bad, right? Y'all will comment on anything that makes a BLK woman look bad. But when it comes to a black man doing something horrible, oh, that's not all. Don't generalize. But then when there's one BLK woman who does something, oh, these black bees and all this. Come on now, bro. Why y'all ain't speaking up? Now, a whole bunch of y'all problematic dudes that's on these social media platforms. Y'all got something crazy to say every day, but you won't talk about these evil BLK men out here that be out here unaliving children and the women. Y'all don't like speaking up on stuff like that. Rest in peace to the children. The father who did this is no longer here. He's probably in down under. That's all I have to say. Prayers go out to the family.
And their first court date was supposed to be yesterday, so Monday, the day before the day after the shooting. He had 4 children with that woman. He was going to be in divorce proceedings speaking about child support the next day, which is what led to this shooting. You can't things that they tell you. He literally killed those people. He killed his family because he didn't have the funds to take care of them. And he felt like this would have been game over for him. He was 31 with 8 kids. He killed 8 kids. One of the kids wasn't even his. He went for every child in that house. One of those children was the cousin, his nephew. He literally killed his nephew in the sake of just killing every child possible. He shot the women and he shot all the children because he was supposed to be in divorce proceedings the next day. And that's why you don't see black men talking about this. That is why you don't see a lot of black men talking about this, because they feel like it's a shame on black men. But really, it's not even that. Sexual discipline is something that needs to be taught much more extensively throughout the community. And somebody in our community will shame somebody for being gay, but won't shame 8 kids. Won't shame 8 kids with 3 different women. He was already on child support with 1 woman, and his wife that he had 4 more children with was in the process of leaving him, and they were going to go to court the next day. That's why he tried to flee too. That's why he tried to flee. Y'all gonna talk about mental illness. He was gonna be in divorce proceedings the next day, paying for 4 more kids after he's already on child support on the hook for 2 of them. And that's why he got a new wife, but he had different baby mamas and stuff, and he had 8 kids. I need y'all to hear it. That just pissed me clean off looking it up.
All right, guys, we got a few more things we're going to go over. Bear with me. Going down memory lane here.
Okay.
Going down memory lane.
All right, hear me out. And maybe this is just me, but I just thought about it because I was driving on my way home. I'd really be ready to cut a nigga off over the smallest shit. Like the littlest thing, I just be turned off. Like, ugh. It was mad people in the regular lane, and the express lane was clear as fuck. I'm zooming through that bitch. Pass it. Feet. As a grown man in 2023 living in the state of Florida, specifically Dade County, Broward County, fuck is you doing without a sun pass? Like, honestly, you want to just vibe in traffic. Vibe. Could take you 15 minutes to get somewhere. You want to chill out for the next 45 minutes sitting in a regular lane for what? It ain't going to work with me, baby. It ain't going to work. It ain't going to work. I ain't going to lie. I'm talking about, yo, babe, get over into the express lanes faster. Da-da-da. Nah, like, I ain't finna do all that. Bitch, if you don't drive over them fucking cones and get on.
By now, you may have heard of the tragic story between self-proclaimed soft life investor Ashlee Jenae and her white fiance, Joe Mccan. And the story involves a whirlwind romance, a dream Zanzibar trip, and suddenly a tragic unaliving. Before I cover off this story, I want to first address the elephant in the room. I've covered off a lot of divested disasters. I've covered off a lot of swirling sagas, unfortunately. And one thing that I think is almost never talked about when it comes to, promoting Black women dating white men and the soft life era and getting you a little white man to level up your life. One thing that we oftentimes don't talk about is the fact that Black women collectively are not acculturated to deal with white men.
And the people. So he has frequent.
Tell us more about the hotel staff from what you know based on your source.
So my source told me that Joe is a frequent visitor of Zanzibar. and he is well known by hotels, staff, and the people. So he has frequented Zanzibar. And my source said they were arguing about him cheating on her. He would leave the villa to go to other women at night.
And other women, would it be local women?
Yes. They also said that there was an argument, I think at the reception or something like that. Outside, there was also another argument. Somebody was flirting with Ashlee, and he got offended, and she started screaming about him cheating on her.
That's throughout the entire time. Since April 4th, when they checked in to the resort, to April 8th, they were fighting over alleged cheating, with Joe leaving the resort to visit local women sexually, correct?
Yes, that is what my source said. And he said that the police have arrested about 10 people who are suspected of being involved in terms of investigation-wise. The hotel staff, some people, also his friends. He had a friend there.
Wait, who had a friend there? You got to be clear so that they're following.
Joe Mccan had a friend in Zanzibar. And that friend has been arrested too.
Was this a male friend?
Yes, a man.
So he had a man with him at this resort that has been detained.
Yes.
You know, this whole story is sad, and I hope this woman gets justice. I hate that it even had to come to this point. Like, some people are saying, all white men are killers, all white men. No, that's not necessarily true. I would never say that a white man is better than a black man. I would never say that. And I'm not comparing the two at all, because women can get hurt by any man regardless of the race. Like, that's crazy. You have to be careful with just how a man treats you in general. I mean, if he did this, which it sounds like he did, yeah, he deserves to be in jail for the rest of his life. That does not mean that she deserves to die. Like, you guys really need to get it together. But anyways, this is a whole sad case. You guys let me know how you feel about this in the comments below.
All right. What's going on, everybody? Like, share, subscribe on the way in. Thanks for joining me last minute. I'm going to try to get through all the information today in a way that's as quick and expedient as possible. But I just kind of wanted to give you guys just a brief overview of what I've been covering off, and just even more and more stories that have been developing, and circle back on this conversation around, who are Black women safe with, and more specifically femicide. Because whenever you have examples of Black women being, unalived by the hands of anyone, particularly Black men, and they make national headlines, and sometimes in certain instances end up getting international headlines, it always brings up a conversation around femicide. And it just so happens within the last week or so, you've had viral stories around Black men unaliving Black women, and presumably or allegedly white men unaliving a Black woman, or being involved in unaliving a Black woman, although that story is still ongoing. So, but with that said, this brings up the question of who Black women are safe with. And usually what happens in these kinds of scenarios where you see Black women being unalived, and it's gruesome, it's whatever, it's very common for the old talking points about, like, what is it, like every 4 hours a Black woman is being unalived by the hands of Black men. Like, it's really common to see these statistics around unaliving, and these statistics around the safety of Black women being pushed. And a lot of that is based upon misinformation. So, I remember doing a live maybe like 3 years ago or so, where I was talking about just femicide, Black femicide specifically, and what that meant. And I thought it was good to kind of refresh the conversation around this, given just some of the recent headlines, specifically as it relates to Black women being unalived. And the larger question that oftentimes comes up, which is, who are Black women safest with? Because what you'll see is people who are already working backwards from their conclusion, or people who are pushing propaganda, whether they're pushing propaganda to try to protect the white male image, whether they are swirlers and divestors who for some reason see white men as like their ticket out of the Blackistan, whatever it may be. They'll oftentimes use stories like this to push ideas about the Black community that are not true. And then on the flip side, it can also be just a reason to just cause dissension or just ultimately promote a whole bunch of different misinformation that doesn't really help anybody. So that's what I want to look at today. I wanted to look at just some viral stories. I kind of gave you guys a brief overview of the ways that I've covered some of it off. And then we're going to look at some numbers around IPV, DV as it relates to just different races in general, and then specifically DV and IPV. When I say IPV, I mean interpersonal violence, or specifically domestic violence as it pertains to, Black men with Black women, and then Black women with white women, and then, all of that. So we'll be going over a little bit. I also wrote about this on my Substack for those of you guys who want to get deep into the numbers and also have the references, have the sources. So you're not just taking it from my point of view, but you also have the source to read. But that's what we're going to be covering off today. So like, share, subscribe. What I first wanted to do is I wanted to go back to the video that I played earlier in this live, or brief. It was a Black man calling out other Black men who he says are being quiet on this Shamar Elkins situation. Now, as I mentioned, there's been multiple stories of Black men unaliving Black women. The more recent one was Shamar Elkins, the Black man, Black father, Black husband who unalived 8 children. 7 of them were his biological children. He shot his wife and allegedly his baby mama. Last I heard, they were both in critical condition, but all the children, unfortunately, did not make it. So that was one of the more recent viral stories. But prior to that, you had the situation with the lieutenant from Virginia, who basically was allegedly caught up in a murder-suicide with his wife. And so that's been making headlines, even prior to that for the last week or so. And again, Justin Fairfax, this is now you're talking about a high-profile Black couple. You're talking about a high-profile Black man who has, or presumably, would have the money, the status, who would really have everything that he needed, wasn't necessarily struggling with poverty. Now, he was facing allegations and charges around his reputation. But the point is, he wasn't dealing with a lot of the different economic disparities or things that might be the things that drive people, in the lower income brackets, or just people who are struggling with poverty, to be more likely to be violent. But nevertheless, my point is, there's the last few weeks you have seen consistent stories of Black men unaliving Black women. And of course, that brings up these questions on who are Black women safe with? Because this is happening at the same time we see divesting and swirling being promoted. This is happening at the same time we continue to see that being honestly, promoted to Black women as a better option. And I just want to look at the numbers as to what's actually going on and whether or not Black women really are safer off in the hands of white men. If the answer for Black women today who are dating the young Gen Zers or whatever, if the answer for them is to go and run to white men so that they are safe from the barbaric Black men who are just going to unalive them randomly, or if they are also at risk in interracial relationships themselves, and they have to be actually looking at other things besides race to determine what a good man is. So that's what we're doing. And like I said, I talked about Black femicide. I think I did this about 4 years ago, where I did a deep dive. This was around, what was his name? What was that influencer's name? I can't even think of his name off the top of my head. It was around the time of R. Kelly, and it was someone else. Polite. It was Polite. And so there were conversations around Black men and just abuse and femicide. And so I remember I did a deep dive then. And what I've kind of noticed is it seems like every few years, the conversation around Black femicide, it comes up every few years, the conversation around Black men unaliving Black women every 15 minutes or hour or 4 hours, depending upon who you talk to. It's like a revolving door. And in my opinion, they tend to recycle the same stats. And they're actually not looking at domestic violence in its entirety. So That's what we're going to do. I'm going to pull up this story, though, of a Black man who calls himself calling out other Black men about their silence surrounding Shamar Elkins in that specific scenario. And I wanted to look at the comments real briefly because I think this is really, this is a key point when we start talking about conversations around DV, conversations around domestic violence, around interpersonal violence, conversations around what's actually going on in the Black community. I think so often it's really easy to look at it in silos versus looking at it in entirety. So that's what I'm going to show you guys right here. Let me see if I can pull it up. I played it at the beginning, but I'm going to play it again for those of you guys who did not see it. Okay, let me see. And then we're going to look at some of the comments, and then we're going to go into looking at some of the numbers, because that's really what it gets down to. Like, there's what people are saying, and then there's a reality of what's actually going on outside of headlines, outside of social media, outside of narrative, outside of social media influencers. There's what people are saying as narrative, and then there's actually what's going on based upon the data. Okay, so this one right here, I played it earlier, but I'm going to play it again because it's a Black man asking other Black men, why are y'all quiet? Or he alleges that Black men are being quiet about Shamar Elkins, but they had a whole bunch of different stuff to say about Ashlee Jenae. And, you know, I've only gotten a few comments, but I thought the comments were really interesting when we compare situations like Ashlee Jenae and Shamar Elkins and the different response that we get and the different narratives that it promotes. Let me see.
Black men, I'm just checking in. Y'all quiet in the mug about the 8 children that was unalived by their Black father in Louisiana. Y'all were so quick to talk about Ashlee Jenae being unalived by a YT man, allegedly, because that hasn't come out to be proven yet. You know what I'm saying? However, what about this man right here who went on a unaliving spree of his 8 freaking children? I have yet to see a lot of y'all problematic men come out to address this situation. And I honestly know why y'all don't address situations like this. I honestly know why. Because you know darn well that it makes BLK men look bad, right? Y'all will comment on anything that makes a BLK woman look bad. But when it comes to a Black man doing something horrible, oh, that's not all. Don't generalize. But then when there's one BLK woman who does something, oh, these Black bees and all this, come on now, bro. Why y'all ain't speaking up? Now, a whole bunch of y'all problematic dudes that's on these social media platforms, y'all got something crazy to say every day, but you won't talk about these evil BLK men out here that be out here unaliving children and the women. Y'all don't like speaking up on stuff like that. Rest in peace to the children. The father who did this is no longer here. He's probably in down under. That's all I have to say. Prayers go out to the family.
So I wanted to hear what y'all had to say about this. Before I look at some of the comments, I wanted to play this because while I have heard some Black women share this sentiment, I thought that it was interesting that this was coming from the perspective of a Black man. And I hear you say, Dean, you say you know this dude. So are you saying you're familiar with him? Like you've seen him, in social media before his content? I'm curious. It's when he says Black men kill every day, nobody says nothing. Yeah, that's true. That's actually true. And just for the record, men are the most violent to other men. Like if we want to talk about femicide and if we want to talk about deep IPV, interpersonal violence, DV, domestic violence, if we want to talk about that in its entirety, nobody is more violent to men than men. So I think androcide, honestly, it happens at a much higher rate than femicide, but we don't really hear about androcide. We hear about femicide. We hear about violence towards women. But as you said before, men are getting unalived every single day. It happens all the time. Black men at the highest rate, but that's not really up for debate. It's really only when it happens to women that it becomes something that's debatable. But with that said, I just was curious your guys' feedback. I saw this and I've heard this sentiment from other women, but I think hearing it from another Black man calling out other Black men, I just wanted to know your guys' thoughts. That was it. Okay, so you said he was on channel on YouTube and you seen him people reaction. Okay, so you just know him. You're saying you know him from okay, just from previous content. Okay, that's fair. What I want to look at real quick, actually do this real quick, you guys, like, share, subscribe if you're here. Show some love on the Cash App, Super Chat. Y'all know the drill. Support this channel if you like what's going on here. Is that a black man did something? It's proof positive. Yeah. Okay. So this is interesting. It says the difference between these two instances is that if a black man does something, it's proof positive that all black men are bad, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. The framing makes a big difference. Black serial killers, right, or just black unalivers, however you want to put it, they are oftentimes treated as white serial killers. End up getting Netflix series, end up getting entire video contracts, and they end up being showed on the likes of, Prime Television, on, they make movies out of them, they make entire series, and they make a lot of money, and they actually romanticize them. I mean, I say this because I've watched, there are quite a few true crime documentaries and true crime movies that I've watched that are based upon white serial killers or just white men going on really weird, crazy, unaliving sprees. So, media has a way of romanticizing, to a certain extent, it's white criminals. And what you'll see sometimes in those stories too, they'll usually give them a backstory of like, oh man, he wasn't hugged enough as a child, or he was mistreated when he was a kid, or his mom wasn't there, or his dad was absent. Like, they're usually going to give you a backstory. They're going to show you pictures of him on a yacht, or pictures of him, with Girl Scouts, or hanging out on the beach or at church. Like they're going to give the full spectrum story when it comes to, like I said, if a white man ends up having a Netflix series or a documentary or whatever, and they romanticize it, it's going to be portrayed in a way that makes it very clear it's this particular crazy, weird individual who's doing this. But it's obviously not all white men. It's not going to be framed as something that all white men do. But I do understand that, unfortunately, when these cases happen and it's at the hands of black men, it is very easy for this now to become something that all black men did, versus this particular black man over here who did something bad or wrong or was crazy. You know what I mean? Okay. Yeah. So you're saying this dude had 8 kids and 20 years. He's like, how's that a reflection on me? Right. Like, that's what he decided to do. But anyways, okay. So, I just wanted to hear some of your guys' feedback. What I wanted to do is look at just some of the initial comments I got, because I thought that was a little bit interesting, and then I'm gonna go into some of the other reactions.
Black man, I'm just checking in. Y'all quiet in the
that they had, because let me see. Because basically his point is, why do y'all have all this smoke? Basically, you have all this smoke for Ashlee Jenae, you have all this smoke for Shamar Elkins. I mean, no, for Ashlee Jenae, but y'all don't have no smoke for Shamar Elkins. That's basically his argument. And I've seen black women, to a certain extent, kind of argue the same thing. Some of y'all, even in my comments, people accuse me all the time of being very selective about whatever content I choose or don't choose. And first of all, I'm the first to say, like, I actually don't. I'm one person, so there is absolutely no way I can keep a pulse on what's happening everywhere all the time. I don't hear about stories all the time. You know what I mean? There are times where it's like a viral story will pass by and I haven't heard about it until a week later. So there is absolutely no way I can keep tabs on every single viral story that's going on in Black America and Black diaspora, just the world, period. So, I've also been accused of being like, oh, well, you're very selective about the stories that you pick. But it's like, actually, no, you're very selective about the stories that you want to listen to. You know what I mean? What's going on, Ask My Brother podcast? It's so good to see you here. So good to see you, says you're doing the Lord's work. Thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate you. I've had a few people reach out to me and be like, you got to do an interview with him. And I've been thinking about that. I took a little bit of a pause on interviews for a bit because there's just been so much going on in the background. But would love to circle back with you or connect with you at one point and schedule an interview. That's been on my to-do list, and I've had quite a few of my followers say that we should link up. So it's really good to see you, catch you live. Thank you again for the support. Okay, so we're going over this video again on why are Black men quiet, allegedly. He alleges that Black men are quiet over Shamar Elkins, but they are loud over Ashlee Jenae. So I wanted to see some of the comments here, or just some of the feedback here. Here it says, basically, I'm quiet because when Black men, I'm trying to read what he says. Let me see. It's not on quiet because it's because when black men do, it's black men because they don't give a F. If Holly Bailey was a white woman, do you think she would have got away with accusing of abuse? Okay, I'm trying to understand what he's saying. So let me move on to a comment that I actually understand what he's saying. My bad. Okay, so this one, when he's asking, the question is, why are black men loud about Ashlee Jenae but quiet about Shamar Elkins? This one right here says, okay, the black community was even more quiet about Aaliyah Henderson, and rightfully so. We shouldn't weaponize anecdotal tragedies in our community as ways to attack one another. Notice no other group does this, especially in this white supremacist act. It's just disgusting. This is a man being like, everybody is very selective about what they choose and choose not to talk about. We're not supposed to be out here promoting our L's. Now, this is a story that I was not aware of. I don't know how many of you guys are aware of the story involving Aaliyah Henderson. Y'all let me know down in the comment section if you are familiar with the story. I was not aware of it. I'm actually surprised that this story didn't get more feedback, but it might be because it's involving a woman who actually does a very heinous crime to her kids. And the story basically involves, Aaliyah Henderson, a Black woman who is charged. It says 6 counts of aggravated murder, 4 counts of murder, 6 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of felonious assault, 3 counts of child endangering, 1 count of tampering with evidence, 2 counts of gross abuse of a corpse. It said this 28-year-old Cleveland mother was accused of unaliving her 2 young daughters and burying them in suitcases in a field. And she was arraigned in, Cuyahoga County Court. And she basically was, she was seen in court recently, and she pled not guilty to the below charges of unalivings of her daughters, a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. They were half sisters. So this was a Black woman who was standing trial for unaliving her own daughters who were found buried in suitcases in a field. I was not, this story is insane. This story is insane. Absolutely insane. I'm curious how many of you guys are familiar with that story. This is my, I'm just now, I think, gaining some more understanding of it. But his point is, why would we go around promoting our L's? Like, what's the point of doing that? And using stories of very sick, demented, or unwell people to promote entire narratives, or to basically try to cast a net on how all Black people are, on how all Black women are, or on how all Black men is, like, that's stupid. No one's going to promote their L. So that's basically what he's saying here. Now this dude says he's foreign and that he's a political shield, I have not heard anything about Shamar Elkins being a foreigner or an immigrant. I have not heard that. I also don't understand why anytime a Black American is caught in an act that is just undesirable or caught doing something crazy, while the first question is whether or not they're an immigrant, as if Black Americans also don't have the capacity to do bad things. Of course, there are Black immigrants who I'm sure do crazy stuff, but I'm like, Black Americans are not flawless. Like, there are people who are American born, who have been here for, decades, if not hundreds of years. Their ancestry has been here for hundreds of years, and they do bad stuff. Like, I don't understand the need to try to blame everything that happens in Black America on immigrants that are bad. That doesn't make any sense to me. This one here says 2 totally different situations. One was a divester who tore down Black men on the internet and ended up getting murked by the demographic she fetishized. The other victims were children who got, unalived by an obviously mentally ill father. So he's saying there's literally no comparison. Ashlee Jenae, the one reason Ashlee Jenae had a lot of feedback, yeah, you said, so the tether scapegoat. I don't understand. Yeah, I really don't understand that. You said Shamar's FBI. Yeah, to me, I'm like, his name literally, like, Shamar Elkins, that don't sound like, that sounds pretty, if you want to put it, FBA, Black American, ADOS, whatever, to me. But anyways, okay, so this person is saying, okay, so back to his original point, like, why is there all this smoke for Ashlee Jenae, but y'all ain't got nothing to say for the likes of, like, Shamar Elkins, or even if you want to look at, Justin Fairfax, those kinds of such situations. And this dude is being like, okay, so there's no comparison. If you look at Ashlee Jenae, for example, Ashlee Jenae, she literally made her social media life and following and brand was literally about Black women living the soft life through proximity to white men. And she did that by, either passively or sometimes directly saying insulting things about Black men in the process. So that's a completely different scenario when you basically are kind of pedestalizing a group of men who allegedly are the ones who take your life. That's completely different than a mentally ill father who goes crazy basically and ends up just unaliving his kids. They're not really in the same. They're not really in the same conversation, right? So that's his excuse there, or his argument there. I thought that was interesting. Let me see. Now here he just says the shoes, so I think he's just talking about the shoes. Let me see. So he says Black men, that dude's African. Okay, so here we are with the FBA. So I guess you're only Black if you're American. I mean, I don't understand that logic. Like, you're not Black if you don't come from. I don't get it. I don't get the whole. You're not Black because you're not in America. I don't get it, because like there are people who call themselves Black before America was even a thing, but that's another history lesson for another day. It says we're quiet about it because it was an African Caribbean that off his children, not a Black American. So this is our vision. Again, where does it say that the Shamar Elkins was? Where did it say that he was of Caribbean descent? Can somebody let me know? I don't understand. He says brother oh my gosh, I don't understand. But anyways, the whole point, I thought this was interesting because this was a Black man who was basically asking, why are Black men quiet? So we saw the tether stuff. We saw okay, we're not talking about him because he's a tether. How and who and at what point did it came to the conclusion that he's a tether? I don't know. We know that he obviously served in the army. We know that. The name Shamar Elkins to me seems very Black American, but that's just me. But either way, some people are saying, oh, we're not talking about him because he's, I guess, a tether or a foreigner or whatever. So evidently that means you're not supposed to talk about him. Okay. Some people were saying, oh, we're not talking about him because why would you promote your L's? Like, no one's going to go out of their way to promote the image of them looking back. Okay, that's one argument. Another one is saying, like, what are you talking about? There's trying to assume that we should talk more about Shamar Elkins when Shamar Elkins, he wasn't going around talking bad about Black men. He just did something crazy. Ashlee Jenae, she was going around saying stuff about Black men and ended up being unalived, allegedly, right? Allegedly unalived by a white man. Of course, Black men are going to have something to say about that. So it's not really on the same, it's not like the same scenario, right? But to me, what this conversation starts to show is the different conversations and the different narratives. Oops. To me, what it reveals is the conversations that arise, you know, anytime there's unaliving, especially, you know, if the murder is intraracial murder versus interracial, there's a big difference. And there's a reason like a story like Ashlee Jenae is going to hit the headlines. There are plenty of stories of white men unaliving white women. There are stories of Black men unaliving Black women. But I think one of the reasons Ashlee Jenae's story got a lot of traction was because of obviously the interracial component. And then the fact that she was already a public figure. I mean, she wasn't on the same levels of like, you know, Justin Fairfax, right? Someone who was in politics, but she was someone who she had public accounts and she was a public social media influencer, brander, who she built her entire social media profile off of the soft life with this older white man. So she lived out loud. She lived in the public. She was very in the forefront about her lifestyle and her connection to white men and what that meant for her. So when it really blew up and it became lethal, of course, a public person with a public persona and a public message is going to face public scrutiny. That is just what comes with the territory. And so, again, these kinds of conversations, to me, what they reveal is what people already believe, that whether it be about Black men, about Black women, about love, about white women, it brings all this stuff to the surface. And as I mentioned before, anytime there are situations of high profile people who face homicide, it's going to be an opportunity for people to promote a whole bunch of different narrative and propaganda. That's, you know, what I've noticed. So some of y'all saying she was a music video girl. I've heard all kind of different stuff. I've heard stuff about her being a music video girl. I've heard her stuff about being, you know, in the nightlife, you know, to keep it PG. I've heard all kinds of allegations, but none of that to me has been confirmed. What was confirmed for sure was that, like, obviously she was a soft life influencer, a self-proclaimed divester. We know she went on vacation with this guy who was, was her fiance evidently. And then after a very, very dramatic fight, she ended up unalived hours later. That's what we do know. That's what we do know. Okay, you said nobody leaving the Caribbean to live in a... Listen, my family's from Louisiana, but I hear what you're saying. Shreveport, I hear you. Most people aren't going out of the way to... I understand. Like, there are certain places where immigrants tend to... where they tend to settle. Okay. Wait, so I'm trying to understand the question here. So, okay, so this one says Black women are safe under the leadership of a good man. I would agree. So we're going over these different viral stories. We're going over some of the different things that people are saying, the different conversations around who was what. You have this Black man over here who was asking Black men, why y'all quiet? And he alleged that Black men are quiet because Black men don't want to look bad. That was kind of what he came to the conclusion to. Now, when you look at the stories around, obviously, Ashlee Jenae, there's all kind of different speculation. People saying that, he was maybe cheating. People saying that maybe it was people in the hotel. Like, there's all kinds of speculation. But what we know is at the end of the day, these are, the examples that I'm sharing, these are recent examples of Black women who ultimately ended up being unalived way before they should have been. And it really begs the question, who are Black women the safest with? Because one thing Black women also like to talk about is, protection and this idea of being safe with the men that they're with. And that's obviously that is a natural desire. And so when you see cases like this from high profile women or women who are in, the public in some capacity end up being unalived, it brings these things to light. It causes them to question, well, who are we really safe with? Now you're going to have some people you're going to have some ladies lead into the Descent from Men movement and say, hey, as long as you're with a man, he is going to be unsafe, right? Like, let me see if I can find this one. Like, some women take this approach.
If a man is born with a penis, he has the propensity to kill you. Obviously, this is alleged because there is no proof that her husband killed her. And also, rest in peace to Ashlee Jenae. I don't want this to be super tone deaf since the news literally just dropped. I feel like if you are a person that follows my content, obviously we're not going really to believe that she ended up taking her own life by hanging herself. I feel like most women do not agree that in most cases is what happened. Let's just say we find out tomorrow that he's guilty, right? And he actually was the one that unalived her. One of the biggest things that patriarchy does is that they divide and conquer. And one of the number one ways that they've done this is through different races, through different gender identities, the country, the ethnicity, your religion. They have all of these things of separatism. That way, you don't generalize, because generalizing means that you are going to be able to make more assumptions based off of a larger group of people for your own survival. Listen, whether that man was Black, whether he was white, whether he was Asian, Indian, etc., men are out here killing women. Those are just the hard and raw facts. Men are out here killing women.
Okay, so I wanted to play this because, as I mentioned before, anytime we have conversations around domestic violence, interpersonal violence, DV, the narrative is always framed as women being the victim. And of course, those are also the stories that are going to make the headline. It's going to be the ones when women are being unalived, when they are being hurt, when they are being all that kind of different stuff. It's going to be framed that way. What we really don't like to talk about is the reality behind IPV. And by IPV, I mean interpersonal violence, and the reality behind DV, domestic violence, which is that much of the violent crimes are much more bidirectional. And when I say bidirectional, many of the crimes, many of the violence, it's women hitting men, men hitting women. And I've gone over this over and over and over again. when you look at violence, specifically in domestic violence, women overwhelmingly actually initiate violence towards men. They initiate violence towards men. That is actually what the stats shows. With that said, now I want to go into the article where I broke down a little bit the numbers regarding interpersonal violence, regarding domestic violence, because what these kind of stories show, whether it's with a white man, whether it's with a black man, whatever, what it ultimately perpetuates is this idea that men are inherently violent. Whether your belief is that, okay, black men are inherently violent, so I'm going to get with a white guy, or whether your belief is that all men are inherently violent, so decenter men, either way, the narrative is that men are inherently violent and they can't be trusted. And the challenge that I have with that is it's not really giving the whole picture, right? We just briefly found out, you know, when I was answering that question, this story from a let me see, a story about a black mother that I was actually not aware of, called Aaliyah Henderson, right? And this story didn't make headlines anywhere. This is a 28-year-old black woman who was, you know, basically on trial for the unaliving of her two daughters who were found buried in suitcases, by the way. So what I'm saying is, these kinds of viral stories, whether it's with a white man, whether it's with a black man or whatever, you walk away, or somebody walks away with the message that men are violent, they're inherently violent, and they can't be trusted. Whether it's all black men are violent, so I'm going to go with a white man, or whether it's, listen, decenter all men because all men are violent. That the message, nevertheless, is men are violent, period. That's what it is. But we're not taking into consideration that women specifically also can be violent. By the way, lesbian relationships, you know, based upon different studies, actually tend to be the most violent, tend to have the highest rates of IPV, interpersonal violence. Nobody wants to talk about this. I'm just showing this one story that I didn't really see this get headlines anywhere, of a woman who is facing trial for unaliving her own two daughters. And by the way, what the stats do show is that actually women are the biggest unalivers of children. Now, I'm not saying it's because women are inherently more violent than men, but what it is that women are more often with men. Women are more often with men. But what I'm trying to say is, when we start to actually look at the numbers, what we find is that this idea that men are inherently violent, they're going around just finding reasons to unalive, whether it's black men who are just looking for reasons to kill all their kids and their baby mamas and the baby whatever because of child support, as in the case of Shamar Elkins, which was like a really wild, crazy situation, whether it's running with stories like that and saying, okay, therefore all black men are like this, or whether it's, you know, a divested disaster or whatever, we're very, very comfortable putting men in the category of violent if it comes to that. We're not very comfortable with talking about the ways in which women can also show up in those scenarios and the ways in which they can also do damage. And I think when we're really honestly having a conversation about this, when we're having a conversation about, okay, well, who's safer for black women or and who's safe in general, we actually have to look at what is going on, like what's actually going on when violence is introduced in a romantic relationship. So that's what I want to look at a little bit today. So shout out to you guys also. I see some love coming through on the super chat. Again, shout out to you, Ask a Brother Podcast, for the 2. Shout out to you with the 3 on the super sticker. I really appreciate you. Inspirational Truth here. It says, replay gang, good evening from New Orleans. Hit the like. That what about black on black is a deflection we heard before with the police, y'all. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you with the $4.99. Shout out to you with the 20. I appreciate it. It says, I'm not going to talk down on the sister, but when Keisha gets with Brad, they do a lot of code switching. Keisha starts talking a little wider. At least when a brother gets Becky, he still acts like a brother 9 to 10. Okay, 9 out of 10. Thank you. I really appreciate the support. And this is just my personal opinion, y'all. My personal opinion. I agree to a certain extent. I agree with what he's saying, only because I've actually actively heard black women admit this, and I think because of the nature of men and women, and because of the nature of most black women who are promoting swirling and divesting, because most of those women are promoting a more patriarchal kind of traditional setup where the white man is the provider and the white man is a protector, and they are taking on the more feminine role. that means they're essentially promoting a scenario in which they would be submissive. They're promoting a scenario where they would be, you know, under the leadership of that white man. So based upon that dynamic, yes, it seems reasonable that any Black woman who's promoting swirling and divesting, they're going to start to adopt some of the white aesthetic, whether it's them getting blonde hair, whether it's trying to lighten their skin, getting blonde streaks, wearing their hair exclusively straight, always wearing weaves. Some women, not all, but some women will actually try to stay slender or lose weight. Some are going to try to change their vernacular or talk nicer. Like, I've actually heard women express this. I remember one video I did maybe about a year ago of a Black woman who's with a white man. Now, she didn't claim, like, I don't think she ever claimed to be a divester or swirler. She just happened to fall in love with a white man. But she was honest that when she first started dating him, she actually felt like, or she wondered if she had to change herself a little bit. And he was like, hey, like, I like you for being a Black woman. If I wanted to date a white girl, I date a white girl. And so she admitted that her white man at the time said, hey, no, just be you, be who you are. Like, don't try to change yourself. Don't try to be more of what you think I want. Just be a Black woman. So she talked about the process that she went through being with a white man, but still accepting her being Black. Like, I remember doing a whole video on this like a year ago. So I'm saying that because I do believe there's a bit of truth to that. When it's a man and a woman, the dynamic switch. When it's a Black man with a white woman, like, it's not to say that doesn't happen in certain capacities, but I think by and large, because men are generally expected still to be the leader in some capacity, men are still expected to protect and provide. That means that is going to set up certain dynamics in the relationship. And that means that in some ways, women are still going to be looking for something or somebody to submit to. This is why you got some white girls who ends up with Black guys and they may start wearing braids. You know what I mean? They may start, I mean, some of them are they're white. They're just completely white, and it is. But you'll also see sometimes where it's like, you know, a white girl will start getting with a Black man, and she starts wearing her things a little different. She may learn some foods. Like, it's really natural for a woman who gets with a man of another culture to try to understand and learn aspects of his culture so that she can be more submissive. She can be more supportive. She can be a helpmeet. That's what women want to do, I think, inherently. So yes, so I definitely, to a certain extent, I agree with that. Okay, so we're going back to this question: Are Black women really safer with white men or Black men? You know, and looking at these viral stories that include Black women being unalived, Black women basically losing their lives at allegedly at the hands of their loved ones. And it brings this question to light: who are Black women safest with? And so I wanted to real briefly, I wanted to go over the article that I just published yesterday that gets a little bit more granular into the actual numbers around interpersonal violence, around DV, domestic violence, and what that means. I've done research on this in the past, but I wanted to circle back. And then, you know, before I go into it, for those of you guys who are really interested, you guys can, first of all, follow me on Substack. If you have not already, go ahead and follow me on Substack. Actually, let me share that with you guys in the real quick. Let me share that with you guys in the I need to get some moderators back. I used to have some, but I don't know where they went. Where'd y'all go, moderators? Okay, so you can follow me here if you guys want to just keep updated on my articles, and there's a lot more data that I post here. But these are also sources for those of you guys who are really interested in finding the sources. You want to read stuff yourself. You want to make sure it's just not coming from me. Okay, what's going on? Shout out to you. Okay, you're right. Shout out to you. Yeah, for those of you guys who want to read the sources yourself, I do reference all the sources you guys can go and check, because I do think it's really important when someone makes a claim, especially around, you know, interpersonal violence, IPV, DV, domestic violence. It's important to have sources. So just kind of guys letting you know where I'm pulling from, where I'm getting my information from, and you guys are welcome to go cross-reference. Again, you can follow me on Substack to get more of this information. So now we're going to be looking at who Black women are safest with when it comes to relationships, when it comes to violence. And so I want to also be clear to kind of just set the context of this conversation. Generally speaking, less than 1% of the American population actually dies at the hands of violence. Okay, it's an incredibly small number. So when we are talking about violence, and when we're talking about violence that ends in homicide, it's still important to remember that these are rare cases. Now, one of the reasons I think they get a lot of media attention is because it is so rare. It's not every day you just see someone in front of you being unalived, or being shot or whatever. Like, that's not something that people necessarily experience on a day-to-day thing. And so I want to just set the expectation for this conversation that someone getting with somebody else and ending up unalived it's something that actually rarely happens in any scenario in any racial context. Like, these are still rare. Violence in relationships are still rare. Violence that ends up in homicide is still rare. So that's just important to note when you're having conversations around DV or homicide, because what can happen again is people run with narrative. They'll look at it, they'll look at a Shamar Elkins, they'll look at a Justin Fairfax or whatever and say, see, this is what Black men are doing. And then they'll fearmonger and they'll say, see, Black woman, if he with a Black man, he can unalive you, he could take you out, he could take all your kids. They'll do that. And they forget that, y'all, these are like I said, 1% of the American population is dying from homicide. Like, this is such a small minority of people who are actually experiencing this. So the likelihood of you getting with a Black man and being unalived is actually lower than you getting hit by lightning. That's reality. Black women are actually more likely to be hit by lightning than they are to be unalived by a Black man. Like, so I want to set the conversation that when we're talking about violence for any race, any demographic, it's still rare. And I'm talking about violence as someone being like unalived, it ending up in homicide. I'm not talking about necessarily people putting hands on each other. Obviously that rate that's higher, but just like someone ends up being unalived. And the reason it's so small, like I said, that's partially why we always see it on the headlines, because it's very rare. If you think about the amount of people that are existent in the United States versus the amount of people who actually end up going under because someone else took their life, again, you said don't matter, it's always Jermaine's fault. Y'all are crazy. Okay, all right. Let me see. So I wanted to just mention that, put that out there as we're going over the stats, right? So again, this just to be reminded, violent crimes in general, if we're talking about in general, are still very rare. However, when it does happen, we want to actually look at the rates, right? So I'm going to go over some different, just like some general stats as it relates to kind of what's going on across the board. And then really what I kind of want to dig into a little bit deeply here is the conversation around intimate partner violence, and basically what violence looks like in an interracial relationship versus when it's like, Black men and Black women. That's what I want to look at. So we're starting at the top here. So, we're talking about violence. The context here, especially if we're thinking about 2026, is that, the first 8 months or so, Black women's unemployment surged basically 40%, while white women's rates remained flat. So this economic freefall is not coincidental to rising violence. It's foundational. The disproportionate homicide rates experienced by Black women are not the result of individual pathology or cultural factors within Black communities. Rather, they represent the measurable outcomes of systemic failures, concentrated poverty, residential segregation, discriminatory policing, and the persistent trauma of historical racism. So basically, to sum it up, any community that faces economic challenges, systematic challenges. We talked about how Black women's unemployment rate has fallen. Also, Black men's unemployment rate has fallen. There's been a higher rise of concentrated poverty. And that's created a whole bunch of different things. That is always going to create an environment for more violence, period. That's just across the board. And so when you talk about conversations around violence, it's important to not necessarily center it around race. It's more important to center it around, okay, what's actually going on? Let's look at what's going on economically. Let's look at what's going on, this disparities around wealth. Let's look at what's going on in the systems. When you actually look at policies and people who are actually trying to promote policies to deal with rates of violence, to deal with things of that nature. What you'll notice is that rarely do people who are trying to, pass policies, rarely are they saying, oh, this is because all Black men are bad, therefore we need more money for this. Or this is because, such and such men are violent, therefore we need to do this, right? Like they're usually citing issues of public health, right? And so basically what I'm underscoring is that there is a correlation between a more challenging economy, that leading to less jobs, that leading to people being under more stress, that leading to people also now having less economic access to mental health, less access perhaps to food, to water, to stable housing, to different things. That's going to create a culture of violence. And after a while, that happens systemically over and over again, there's going to be impacts of that. And we even saw that with what's his name, Shamar Elkins. This is a man working at the UPS who had 7 kids, right? And they said that he was about to go to divorce court to talk about child support. UPS is an honest job. UPS is not necessarily a way that you're going to be able to support 7 kids comfortably. So I'm sure that man was stressed, Okay, shout out to you with the 50. Here it says, I really appreciate you. It says, this programming is 400 plus years in the making and a serious psychosis. You doing God's work. Says keep it up. Thank you so much. First of all, shout out to all of you guys. Just for the support. I really appreciate you guys. I know these are not fun conversations. These are the kind of conversations that have folks hating me, honestly. People, for some reason, when you start talking about DV, IPV, people really do not like you. Folks, they're really in their fields. So thank you guys just so much for the support. I really
That go the money. That go the money.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. It means a lot. 7 kids. Ain't nothing wrong for UPS. UPS is an honest job. Is a UPS salary sufficient to sustain 7 kids in 2026? You know what I mean? So, and there were different articles that said that Shamar Elkins was already really stressed. The reason I'm mentioning that is because these are all things that, like, when people are talking about public policy, these are all things that people are taking into consideration when they're looking at rates of violence. Like, what is causing that? It's rare that somebody has hella money, was on yachts going in and out, doing different things. They're living a good life. They're comfortable. They have their spiritual community. They have therapy, and they just go out and shoot somebody. Like, it's rare that happens. Now, there are obviously rich people who commit crimes, and sometimes those rich people, they commit crimes because they got their money through crime. So that's a whole other conversation. What I'm saying is, usually as people become more economically stable and they become more and more just stable financially, housing-wise, the rates of violence do tend to go off. So there is a connection between economic disparity, poverty, lack of access to mental health, all of that, and violence. It's less about race. It's a lot of times it's more about systems. So just setting the context for that. So baseline reality. Yes, Black women experience homicide at rates that far exceed those of white women. Yet the risk is not evenly distributed across Black communities. Research by Walker 2024 establishes that the disproportionate homicide rate among Black women relative to white women is fundamentally rooted in systemic failures, concentrated poverty, residential segregation, discriminatory policing, and historical trauma. This framing is crucial. It shifts focus from the victims of their communities to the structures that enable violence. So again, what I'm saying is the narrative is often that Black women face higher rates of violence because Black men are just more violent. Black men are more violent and they're looking for reasons to unalive Black women. What they're not doing is actually looking at the factors and the components around it that create environments of violence. Like I said, you place any race, any ethnicity in an environment where there's lack of access to food, to clean water, to economic opportunities, to mental health, to health, period. You place anybody in that scenario, you place any community in that scenario, and they're likely to have higher rates of violence, period. So because it just so happens that Black communities, historically, this is ongoing, tend to be at higher risk for all of these things, therefore they're going to tend to have higher rates of violence. But like I said, when you look at communities that are predominantly white, that are predominantly other races, that have similar rates of poverty, that have similar rates of systemic failures that have some of the rates of things, you'll also notice that violence tends to be higher, interpersonal violence tends to be higher. So again, the issue is not the race. The race itself is not always an indication of how someone is going to be. You have to look at the factors around it. It says geographically, the picture is stark. According to the same research, Black women in the Midwest face elevated homicide risk compared to other regions of the country, suggesting that regional variations in economic opportunity, policy environments, and social infrastructure directly correlate with safety outcomes. So again, what they're saying is, why is it that you put Black women in one environment, right, and homicide rates are low? You take the same Black women, you put them in another environment, and they're higher. And they're pointing now to some of the different factors, like I said, opportunity, policy environment, even access to healthcare. Like I said, access to healthcare, access to help, all those different things. These are all things that when people talk about violence, when people talk about what's going on, they really like to move with narrative and just say, oh, all men are bad, or all women are, like, they really like to traffic on narrative. And what they don't want to do is actually talk about the things that matter, actually talk about the things that create environments that either produce more violence and the factors that lead to that. Okay. So again, I'm just giving you guys a brief overview, trying to set some context here, before we actually get into, okay, so what does violence look like when it comes to relationships, when it comes to Black men with Black women with white men, because that's what some of y'all really want to know about. So here it talks about, the vulnerability of Black women who are pregnant, and like I said, there's a lot of components around that, because just Black maternal health in general is really poor. Obviously, Black women face just higher rates of low preterm birth. A lot of Black women don't have access to proper health care in their pregnancy journey. And then sometimes even in their pregnancy journey, when they're with doctors, they don't always necessarily receive the same amount of care as someone of other races. So there's a lot of things that goes into Black women being at risk when they are pregnant. And what I'm saying is, oops, you guys give me 1 second. Again, these are the factors people don't really want to look at. Like, nobody wants to sit here and read. People don't want to sit here and read when it comes to this stuff. They just want you to tell them what they want to hear, or they just want you to say, this is the victim, this is the villain, and that's it. They don't want to sit here and look at all the different factors that could be actually causing us or leading to a scenario. Okay. So now when we're looking at basically domestic violence, when we're looking at IPVDV, and we start to look at it, we break it down by race. So let's look at the Black woman, right? To understand the specificity of Black women's risk, comparative data is illuminating. According to the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, roughly 58% of both Black women and Black men experience contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetime rates. That suggests systemic patterns affecting entire communities, not just women. This part is really, really, really important. Again, it says, according to the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, roughly 58% of both Black women and Black men experience contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetimes rates. That suggests systemic patterns affecting entire communities, not just women. So essentially what they're saying is, and one of you guys mentioned this early in my live, we like to really focus on the ways in which Black women are victimized. And I'm not here to undermine that. What we don't like to talk about is the fact that Black men are victimized oftentimes at the same rate, and sometimes even more. We want to talk about, if we want to talk about homicide, we want to talk about femicide, right? And men unaliving women, Black men unaliving Black women. Well, men actually unalive men the most. So androcide actually is a much bigger issue than femicide. But because nobody really cares when it's men or Black men, we don't talk about it. But if we actually look at the numbers, Black men themselves are also at risk for experiencing many of the same kinds of violence that Black women do. So the reason I'm saying this is because if we just pointed at Black men and say, oh, okay, well, they're just, all of them are just, abusers. Well, it doesn't really make sense when they actually end up being the victims. The math doesn't map. And when we start to look at it, we understand that it's not necessarily, oh, by nature of the race of these men being Black, that they're violent. It's no, we have to look at the components of things that are actually creating this kinds of environment. And if the stats show you that, okay, Black men are experiencing the same rates of sexual violence, physical violence, DV, all those different things, and in some cases even more, then clearly the issue isn't, okay, well, just Black men are just bad. Because it's like, you can't in one instance try to blame Black men for being villains, but then at the same time, you find out they are actually being victimized too. It's like, you got to pick a struggle. You know what I mean? Hey, what's going on, Dennis Sperling? It's so good to see you in the building. I saw your email. I really appreciate you. Shout out to you. Says your perspective on this matter is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. Thank you so much also for the generous support. I really appreciate you guys coming through today. It's so good to see you here. I know you're very busy. You got a lot going on. So yeah, I appreciate you stopping by. This was a very last minute live, but I wanted to talk about it because in light of a lot of the viral conversations that are including homicide, I know this tends to be the prime environment where we see a lot of ladies, in my opinion, just promoting a whole bunch of different propaganda that's not true. And we're not willing to be honest about, DV, IPV, domestic violence, interpersonal violence. And that's why I think it's important for us to have these honest conversations. So when we are looking at these viral stories, we're looking at it in context. We're not just saying, oh, all Black men are bad victims, but we're also not looking at the ways in which Black men can also be violent. That's the part nobody really wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about the ways in which Black men can be violent, right? So anyway, shout out to you. I really, really, really appreciate the love and support. It means so much. Thank y'all so much.
That go the money. That go the money.
Okay, so going back, as I mentioned before, the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Survey showed that roughly 58% of both Black women and Black men experience contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetimes. Nobody wants to talk about when this happens to Black men. That's what it comes down to. Now, the intersection of gender and race produces distinct outcomes in the most severe cases. When examining homicide specifically, comparative data reveals important nuances about risk distribution across communities of color. So now here's the thing about it. What I actually found is that mixed race women and Native American women face actually elevated risks of violence. So according to the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey data presents a critical finding, multiracial women are also known as the exoticals, right? The exoticals and Native American women are actually more likely than Black women to experience contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetimes. And to me, that was actually a huge monkey wrench because to a certain extent, we see the exoticals going back and forth with Black women all the time. We see the light-skinned, multiracial, or just basically Black woman who identify as being pretty, right? You see them going against the unambiguous colors and crybabies, I guess the whole thing. And to a certain extent, sometimes I feel like it can be a conversation over the victim Olympics, like who has it worse, who has it better. So it was interesting for me to find out that, well, really, if you want to talk about victim Olympics, or if you want to talk about who actually is facing higher rates of IPV, based upon the study, it's saying that the exoticals actually should have more of a reason to be complaining about men, and they're not. That's the crazy thing about it. A lot of these exoticals, they're not tripping. They're not, pressed so much. A lot of them are living their life. They're just mad that you have a lot of these bitter betties who are upset that they feel attractive in their skin. But that's another conversation for another day. With that said, this challenges narratives that frame Black women as the sole focus of femicide research and points to the reality that violence against women of color operates across multiple communities with distinct patterns and root causes. So again, what is it showing? This whole Black men are the worst victims, or the Black men, or whatever. We all know whatever narratives that they like to push that have been going on for decades now. When you actually start to look at the data, it really starts to poke a hole in these ideas and these narratives. Not only how we found out that Black women also experience, high rates of, sexual violence, physical violence, abuse, stalking, things that Black women kind of, to a certain extent, have claimed that they only experience, that they own. We also see that there are other races of women that experience these things at higher rates. And so that begs the question, okay, so is this really like a Black man bad thing? or are there other things going on here? And as a lot of these studies have already suggested, when you're looking at violence, you have to look at the environment. You can't just look solely at a person's race. That's not how this works. You have to look at the environment. You have to look at so many different factors: access to healthcare, their environment that they're around, the poverty of lack of resources, access to food, access to even healthy, clean water. All of those things really can play a big role in the kind of environment that's being created. Like I said, you put any community, any ethnicity in an environment, and you strip them of resources and put them under stress, there's going to be more violence. That's like not even difficult to understand. If you put any community in a place of scarcity, in a place of lack, under high stress scenarios, without access to any relief, that's going to produce violence, period, in the discussion. And that has nothing to do with the racial demographic of that particular individual. But as I mentioned before, in these kinds of scenarios, when we see cases, high profile cases of Black women, it's very easy to traffic around race and not actually look at what's going on when it comes to interpersonal violence. And it's also easy to just blame men. And, we haven't even got deep into this, but we have to remember that I've shared this multiple times. Like if rates of interpersonal violence across the board, Black women, white women, Latina women, all those rates of interpersonal violence, it's generally initiated by women. Like if we want to talk about a couple that ends up, hitting each other, going back and forth, the majority of the time, those cases are instigated by women of different races. But women don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about the ways in which we can also contribute to violence. You know what I mean? We don't want to talk about that. I mean, if I need to bring that study up, I can. I've talked about that multiple times up to this point. But I'm just saying, there's a lot of information out there, a lot of data out there that shows that women they're not like innocent. They're not these like innocent, demure, these innocent demure angels when it comes to these situations that are involving violence. That's not necessarily what's going on. Okay. So here it just basically talks about while, mixed race women and Native American women, they do face higher rates of IPV, still Black women have a distinct crisis when it comes to homicide, right? And they're, again, going back to a lot of the reports suggest that the reason Black women have higher rates of homicide, it's the same reason Black women have higher rates of, a higher death rate when it comes to giving birth, when it comes to maternal health, that a lot of these things can be traced more to structural factors than, anything else, or just pointing specifically to just Black men did it. You know what I mean? So when we go down right here to looking specifically now, this is where I think it really gets interesting. When we look at romantic relationships and the question of who are Black women safer with? Are Black women safest with when they're dating Black men, when they're marrying a Black man? Are they safer when they're with white men or dating white men? Because ultimately, that's really what it comes down to. So some of you guys are going to say, what are you talking about? This race shouldn't matter. And it really shouldn't. But in 2026, we live in an environment where a lot of content creators and a lot of different spaces and a lot of these different social media, silos like to traffic on race. They do. Like, we can just be honest about that. So I'm like, even if people aren't explicitly saying this, which some of them already are, but even if they're not saying it, they're thinking this. So here, this study by Roberts Research Program 2025, it was really interesting because it actually broke down rates of violence based upon race. And I think the findings are really fascinating. So here it says, several studies from the Roberts Research Program 2015 reveal uncomfortable truths that transcend narratives of intra-community violence. So when we look at, Black women with white men, we ask the question, so are Black women safest with white men? Here's what it says. White women and Black women. White men are 5 times more likely to unalive their wife if she is Black than if she is white, according to this study. This statistic implicates not individual Black men, but rather racism and the devaluation of Black women's lives as a structural phenomenon that crosses racial lines. So, the crazy fact is of a lot of the ladies out here who are trafficking the idea that Black women are going to have a softer life. They're going to have a more elevated and ultimately a safer life if they automatically get with a white man. What the data actually shows us is that white men are 5 times more likely to actually unalive their wife if she is Black than if she is white. So put another way, there has been research to suggest that, when violence does occur between a white man and a Black woman, should violence occur, that it's way more likely that a white man is going to actually unalive a Black woman than a white woman. It's way more likely. Literally 5 times. Literally 5 times. You know what I mean? So, really put in layman's, if you want to put that in layman's terms, Black marriages on average appear to be safer than white men and Black women marriages. That's kind of what that's suggesting. It would suggest that, this whole idea that you're going to be safer when you go with a white guy versus a Black man, not necessarily. Not necessarily. And I'm not saying, again, because I started this conversation by saying, hey, let's remember that the majority of relationships don't even end in homicide. Homicide is such a small percentage of the overall American, population. Nevertheless, when it does happen, and when we lock it down by race, the numbers are staggering. White men are more likely to unalive a Black wife than a white wife. It just is what it is. It is what it is. So, and like I said, I provide sources at the bottom. I'm telling you that the study, this is the Roberts Research Program. I have multiple sources at the bottom for those of you guys who want to cross-reference, who want to sit here. If you want to sit here and argue, feel free to do so, but be sure to look at all these sources before you do so. Okay. So that just really blows a hole on the whole soft life, soft era, white man better. It really does, And of course, my goal isn't to try to stoke fear per se in the hearts of women who actually are actively engaged in healthy. Notice I mentioned healthy. A woman who is engaged in a healthy interracial relationship, I ain't got no smoke. But I continue to say, and I will continue to warn women against looking at non-Black men, specifically white men, as a safer option, because anytime a woman does that, I feel like she makes herself a target. She is a target-rich environment. And what I also don't like is how those same ladies who do that, see, that they like to kind of play around with race. At one instance, they want to say, oh, it's not about race, it's not about race. But then at the same instance, if a Black man does something crazy, they're very quick to be like, oh, Black men, right? When a Black man does something crazy, it's Black men's fault. They're not putting all men in that category. It's Black men's fault. But if a white man does something crazy, oh, all men. Oh, all men are crazy. If a white man goes and unalives a wife, if a white man goes and chops up his girlfriend and puts it up in a wall, like what happened, a city or two down from where I live, if a white man goes and decides to chop up his girl and put her body parts all across the beach, right? Like I'm referencing stories. If a white man does that, that's all men. That's all men, right? But if a Black man goes and shoots up his kids and his baby mama and his wife, oh, that's Black men. That's an issue with Black men specifically. So what I'm saying is that what I also don't like about these conversations is how sometimes these ladies, they like to play around with race. They like to pretend it doesn't matter until it comes time to actually blame Black men or hold Black men accountable for something dumb that they've done. And to me, that's not consistent. And the reason they do that is because ultimately, another hard reality that some of us are going to have to face is that as long as, there is a system of white supremacy in any capacity, there are going to be certain Black women who always turn to swirling as a way to socially climb. And so these women they're interested in protecting, to a certain extent, they're interested in protecting the white male image because they need that image, or they need that as a way to socially climb. They look at that as their opportunity to perhaps improve their status in the West, in America, right? And so a woman who values that is always going to protect the reputation of the man she hopes to get with. It just is what it is. So it's not really surprising to me, but we have to be honest about that. And another thing we have to be honest about is, which ladies don't like to talk about. We can't act as if can we really act as if Ashlee Jenae and Joe Mccan, let's just say they're both alive. Unfortunately, they're not. But in a situation where they were both alive and they were both, standing in the court of law for some reason, do we really believe they would be treated identical? Do we really believe that Ashlee Jenae would have the same experience, you know what I mean, of Joe Mccan? I don't think they'd have the same experience. So what I'm saying is the very fact that Black women look to white men to socially climb is evidence that white men arguably have access to a level of either social clout or power, or alleged social clout and power. Because I know there's going to be poor white men out there who are just like, what are you talking about? But the very fact that Black women look to white men as a means to socially climb means that they inherently believe that these white men have access to something that they don't. So if they believe that these white men have access to something that they don't, they're basically admitting that these white men have power. And what is that going to mean in a scenario where you're with a particular white man, but he is homicidal or he is someone who's dangerous? What is that going to mean? You're going to be a victim. You're going to be a victim. If that ends up coming to that place, if it ends up coming to that reality, it's not going to be good, because you've already proven, based upon your own narrative, based upon if you're in the whole Whirler and Divester, claim, you've already admitted that you need this white man to social climb. Therefore, you've already admitted he has more power. Therefore, you've already put yourself, in a certain extent, in a powerless position. Therefore, he can do whatever he wants to you and not face any consequences. This is actually why I believe, this is just my personal opinion, this is partially why I believe that this rate might be a little more higher with Black women than with white women, because of the racial dynamics that exist in this country. You do have cases of like Sade Robinson, where actually someone, that was actually, to me, surprising. You have cases like Sade Robinson where, I think his name is Maxwell Anderson, where he actually was sentenced. And I think, he got what he deserved. And unfortunately, cases like Sade Robinson are a lot more rare. How many cases of, Dakara Thompson, Renia Lewis, Lauren Smith Fields, how many cases of Black women, these are just ones on top of my head, I'm sure many of you guys in the comment section know of other ones. How many cases of Black women end up unalived and the person is still walking free today? He hasn't faced any charges. And so what I'm saying is, yeah, while there are cases where a white man goes and does different things and he actually ends up getting convicted, there are many more that I believe where that doesn't happen. He walks away scot-free, or he whatever. They're still investigating the case and the case is dropped. And, that's what it is. So I'm just saying, it's like, we have to be real about what race actually means today in 2026 and how that plays in relationships. It doesn't mean you can't still find a healthy and wholesome relationship with somebody outside of your race. You absolutely can. I just think anytime a woman positions herself as needing that race or seeking that race specifically for social validation, I think that's already her putting herself in a very dangerous scenario. That's already a recipe for what could be a divested disaster. At best, it's a, broken heart, maybe a baby daddy situation. He doesn't pay child support. And then now ungal Black power and you follow Dr. Umar, right? At best. Or you may end up on, the national television. And you may end up on, nighttime special because you are no longer alive, right? Those are more extreme examples of cases, but it does happen. So like I said, this right here definitely, it definitely questions, or I think blows a hole in the narrative that Black women are automatically going to be safer with white men by nature of them being white. That's not necessarily what the stats actually show. Now here it looks at Black men in interracial relationships. Okay. So it's funny mentioning Groke. I mean, Groke literally references neo-Nazi website. So this is literally that's the most unserious thing ever. Okay, here it says Black women in interracial relationships. So here's an interesting thing. It says a white woman married to a Black man faces a spousal homicide rate roughly 9 times greater than if she were married to a white man. So this dramatic disparity suggests that racist attitudes, social isolation, and stress within interracial partnerships create lethal conditions rooted in systemic racism, not in Black masculinity itself. So again, Black men in interracial relationships. Basically, it's saying, this same study also showed that white women who were married to black men actually faced higher rates of homicide. Really, really fascinating. Now, to me, what this is showing, and this is what people I don't think always necessarily talk about, how the racial dynamics change based upon the gender involved, right? Now, like I said, we have to remember that interracial relationships themselves are still very rare compared to intraracial relationships. They're still a rarity. But what this is suggesting is, the whole idea that by nature of a black person, black woman or black man getting with somebody else, that it's going to be less violent, it's going to be safer. That's not necessarily what the numbers are suggesting. Now, I don't know of as many instances where a black man unalives a white woman and walks away scot-free, or the case is under investigation and dropped. I don't know of many of those cases. If you guys know of those cases, please let me know. Please put that down in the comment section. I am not aware of those cases because I tend to believe if a black man is found unaliving a white woman, in most instances, he's going to be prosecuted. This is why, the whole O.J. Simpson thing that's why that was so controversial, because, this was a black man who allegedly unalived a white woman and he got away scot-free. And a lot of people thought like, oh, that is, you know what I mean? They're like, oh no, that is great. That's not supposed to happen. So that's one of the reasons that case to this day, I think was so, it was so jarring to a certain extent to the American consciousness. And notice how soon after Johnny Cochran was unalived, right? Or not unalived, he, passed away. I mean, depending upon who you ask, some people might, people have stories about that. But just what I'm saying is, it's not common to see a black man involved in a homicide case with a white woman and him walk away scot-free, which is why I mentioned OJ, because the reason that was such a big deal was because not only was he high profile, the race component behind it could not be, overlooked. But with that said, I'm not familiar with this being I'm not familiar with this being like a consistent theme. When I see divested disasters, in most instances, I see it being, white woman, black woman, or sometimes a white woman, black man. It's not to say black men are involved, but I'm not familiar of cases where black women do it a lot and they walk to a white woman and they walk away free. I'm just not familiar with that. If you guys know, I would be curious. You can send me examples. You know what I mean? You can send me examples. But really, what this particular study is referencing is that, interracial relationships, as rare as they are, we can't necessarily say that by nature of a person dating outside of their race, it's going to be safer for them. Because in many instances, it appears as if interracial relationships and the dynamics that, like I said, are surrounding that. What are the pressures that a person faces when they're in interracial relationships? And then you add to that some of the other economic factors. You add to that the environment. You add to that if there are economic challenges, if there is lack of access to healthcare, if there are issues around race and not understanding each other. You add to that can actually create another chasm or another challenge in an already maybe at-risk scenario, which might lead to higher rates of IPV, DV. And so that's what the study is showing. It's like, hey, actually, you don't necessarily escape problems by being in interracial relationships. In some ways, it might just create another problem you're going to have to navigate. Doesn't mean it has to be lethal. But when it comes to that point, we can't overlook the fact that the rates tend to be higher when someone was with somebody outside of the race versus when they are with somebody of their own race, right? Now, here it goes on to white women and racial relationships. It says white women are 7.5 times more likely to murder their black husband versus a white husband, right? So again, you see how these numbers change based upon who's at play. This counterintuitive statistic reveals that intimate partner violence is bidirectional and that multiple communities experience different risk profiles based on identity and social positioning, right? So that's another thing. But I mean, we can think of some of the more, we can even think of some recent viral stories. What was it? Telvin Osborne, what's his name? Telvin Osborne, who was unalived. Christian Abomicelli, where those white girls ended up, unaliving their boyfriends or husbands. I don't even know. I think one of them even got off. Y'all let me know in the comment section. I think one of them was even got off. I want to say Toby Obomaselli, that was the one black dude who was talking real salty against black women and black men, and he ended up getting unalived, and really he ended up getting murked. And there is actually video evidence of him being beat by his white girl, his white girlfriend. I think she ended up serving maybe a little bit of time, but it was minimal. I think, I could be wrong, but Telvin Osborne and his girl, who she said that I think the story was like, oh, she was drunk and she accidentally didn't know that she pulled the trigger and it was an accident. Tell me, understand that she walked off scot-free. I could be wrong, but you know what I mean? But what I'm saying, so those are just two examples. There are two examples of that I'm aware of that got some viral, some traction of, white girls killing their black boyfriends or husbands. You said, okay, so both of them walked. Okay, both of them walked. I wouldn't be. Yeah, that's crazy. Not surprising. So also, interesting to note is, generally speaking, the results of who's involved are likely to be a lot different. Like I said, a white woman killing a black man is likely to face different consequences of a black man who's unaliving a white woman. They're likely to face different consequences versus a white man unaliving a black woman versus a black man unaliving a black woman. They're likely to face different consequences under the court of law. That's not debatable. It's just not. And all y'all folks, like, I don't understand why people like to pretend like these AI. I don't understand people like to pretend like these AI things are perfect. They're not. A lot of these things are like, sometimes they're referencing Reddit things. They're referencing, like I said, Grug, which is referencing Nazi sites. This is why I give you guys references. Some of y'all don't want to actually sit there and read yourself. Some of y'all don't want to actually sit there and read yourself and look at the numbers. But when I say, hey, according to this particular study, and that particular study, and that particular study, there are reasons that they have these sources, right? And then there are reasons too, also this is something else to consider. One study isn't necessarily the gospel truth. What it does, though, is it can speak to general trends. It can give you indication of general trends. And so, really what you should do is look at these studies and then kind of do like an aggregate. But what I'm saying is, like, sometimes I think people kind of depend upon AI too much. I think AI is a good reference for research, but anybody who is an expert in any field will find times when AI has been wrong. Like, there's been times when I've had to correct AI and they'll be like, oh, you're right. Oh, you're right. That's not what I was saying. So AI is not necessarily perfect, especially when you have the numbers there in front of you to let you know, okay, especially if AI is, like I said, referencing Reddit forums, Lipstick Alley, and a Facebook post. You got to take everything with a grain of salt, and you ultimately have to read. But that's the part people don't want to do. They want AI to do the work for them. That's what they want them to do. Anyway, so we're getting through it here, you guys. Like, share, subscribe on the way here. So basically, what this is kind of suggesting, again, is looking at how racial dynamics, how race plays a role when in relationships, when you already consider the components that lead to a culture of violence, like I said, income disparities, lack of access to healthcare, to clean water sometimes, or to just a healthy food, to clean air, access to mental health services. So when you already consider the components that would make any community violent, and then when you add to that, the social dynamics of race and an interpersonal relationship, then this is what it's looking at. It's looking at, okay, what does this look like when all these things are going on here? And, you have people who are trying to get along in environments that in some ways are actually already very hostile. Okay. Yeah, so here we talked about white woman married to a black man faces a spousal homicide rate 9 times greater, right? And then we talked about white woman in cross relationships. Then here's one. Here's an interesting one where it says black woman, and again, this is according to the Roberts Research Program in 2015. It says black woman and intimate partner homicide. It says black woman is approximately 10% more likely to unalive a black husband than a white husband. A far more modest differential that suggests different dynamics entirely. So Yes, a black woman, she is more likely to unalive a black man than a white husband, but it's not necessarily to the rate of what we've seen in these other instances, right? White woman versus black men versus white men. It's not to the same rate. But nevertheless, what these findings do show is that in all of these cases of interracial dynamics, it does lead to a certain extent to more lethal outcomes than if people were with people of their own race. And again, this isn't to say that interracial relationships are inherently going to be more violent, but what it is saying, because violence itself is still something that the majority, especially homicide, that a minority of people experience. But it is to be aware that the fact that, like, hey, when you add race into a dynamic or into a situation that is already perhaps tense or has these other factors, yeah, that can create just another sense of tension. We can't act like 2026 is like a post-racial society. Race is still very much a real thing. Yeah, some people are able to navigate it successfully and healthfully, but let's not sit here and lie and act like getting with somebody from another race is automatically going to be something safer. So going back to the original question of like, okay, are black women safer with white men than black women? Well, based upon these numbers, no, they're not. We looked at different races here, just for the heck of it, because I had it there. But if we go back to the initial question, they're not. That's not necessarily what the data shows. It's just not true. On average, right? Black men relationships actually tend to be safer or not as lethal as black woman, white men relationships. It just is what it is. You can argue with the data, you can argue with the numbers, you can say I hit my mama, or you can say the cheated, whatever. You know what I mean? You can say that, but by and large, it just isn't. Now, I've talked a little bit about this before, different things. I've talked about how I don't believe. I think cultural challenges are very real. In these cases, particularly when you see, if I'm speaking specifically to the dynamics of black women and white men, when you see cases where it seems like a white man just goes kind of like buck wild crazy, like I said, putting girl in walls, hiding the girl in walls, chopping her up and putting her body pieces all across the beach, different stuff, just weird stuff. It's like when I hear things like that, sometimes I wonder, I'm like, okay, so shooting her 15 times, I'm actually referencing, these are actual stories that happened, right? When you hear things which is like, it seems like this guy cracks, I wonder sometimes if it's just like, okay, so when we think about the way in which black women are acculturated and the way in which maybe white women are acculturated, or just the cultural differences, I have to wonder how much of those cultural clashes they run into when they get together, because black women are not acculturated to deal with white men. They're not. And white men are not generally acculturated to deal with black women. They're not. So when they come together, there's going to be some cultural things they have to work through. And how many white men are used to black women's mouth? How many white men are used to that? And so I just wonder how many white dudes crack because they're just simply not used to the way in which black women talk, particularly when they get mad. A black woman can do a little cute swirler, divester, sweet, submissive voice for a bit. But if she's really about that life, if she's really that, if she really got what y'all call some Keisha energy, if she's really a Keisha, and you get Keisha mad, then she's going to drop that whole swirler facade real quick. And what does a white man do? Particularly, you're talking a successful, high-value white man with any kind of status who's used to being respected or treated with a level of respect. And anyway, what does he do when Keisha starts popping off at the mouth? How does he deal with that? So I just wonder that sometimes. Again, these are questions. I'm not saying that this is true. These are just purely my thoughts. I am not. This is purely what I'm thinking randomly. This is not, statistically connected to any of the sources that I just showed. That's just something that I have as like a backdrop when we're talking culture. Like how many of these white dudes who end up in these divested disasters, and Keisha ends up under the ground, unfortunately, how many of these white dudes cracked because they did not understand how to deal with the black woman's attitude? I wonder about that, but nobody's gonna say that though. What's going on? The 18th letter is good to see you. Since I have to give a shout out to our Bay Area sister Shay for supporting us brothers, the negative propaganda that divests and anti-black misanders. Thank you. Thank you so much for the super chat. I really appreciate you. It's good to see you. I know you've been a long time supporter, so I appreciate you. I know this stuff is not always the funnest. That's what I'm saying. They still haven't. They still haven't found her head. That's crazy to me. And the thing about Sade Robinson, she wasn't even like, from what I understand, there weren't like any videos or anything of her or posts of her saying anything disparaging against Black men. You know, we didn't even see that. And so I even feel bad. Like, I do think sometimes I feel like there are Black women out there who they're just, especially young girls, they're just clueless. They don't understand anything. So they're just up for the highest bidder. They're like, if you're Black, if you're Asian, if you're white, as long as you treat me nice and take me on a date, pasta and lobster, whatever. So like, they're not necessarily like trapping in self-hatred. They're just looking for a good time, right? And so like, because there wasn't anything from what I heard about her saying anything negative about Black men. It seemed like she had a pretty cool relationship with her pops, you know? So, but it's sad, even in cases like that, where like a woman she's not even necessarily, you know, trying to do the whole self-hating thing or trying to do the whole, like, she's not openly leading with like the soft life divestiture stuff. Yet and still, you know, sometimes these ladies they're just not being taught how to vet. I don't know how else to put it. You know? So, okay. Let me see if I got this here. I want to make sure I got all the shout out to you. I want to shout out to you guys also with the super chats. I want to make sure I got everything. Okay, here where it says, not changing the subject, but I want to put away this male loneliness epidemic theory. If men feel lonely, we're more equipped to handle it. We have the stock market, crypto passports, we're good. You know what? I have to say I agree with this. I'm not gonna lie. I have to say I agree. I do personally believe, maybe I'm a little bit biased. Call me a little bit biased, but I'm not gonna lie. I do absolutely believe that men inherently are more equipped to deal with loneliness, because if we just think of how societies have been for like, just even think of evolutionary biology and how societies thrived and grew and, you know, even expansion and all those different things. It was men going out there, whether it was in the field, in the forest, on the sea, whether they're going on these different voyages, like it was men out there by themselves, roughing it, looking for things, finding things, exploring things. It was men. So I do think, this is just, again, my personal opinion, I do think men are naturally more equipped to deal with aloneness, just because of the nature of how men operate. It's not to say that they don't still need connection and love and all those things, but I think their need for it and I think the way that they generally operate, it's different than women. Women, we're just a lot more communal, community minded. We care about what so and so says, what our sister says. We care about our community and how that impacts us. This is why a woman, if she likes a man, but her girlfriends don't like that man, or her girlfriends rejected that man, she might be less inclined to want to get with him. This is not always the case, but we've seen some things like Pop the Balloon, where it's like, it may seem like a girl's kind of cool with the dude, but then other girls got something negative to say, and then she's like, oh, I don't want to be out about the other girls. So then she's gonna pop the balloon, or you know what I mean? So I'm just saying, like, I just believe that men are more equipped psychologically. This is my opinion. I could be wrong. I could be way off here. Maybe a therapist, psychologist will come here and just completely tear up my my theory, but that's just my own personal belief. So shout out to you again for that. Shout out to you with the $4.99 on the super sticker. I appreciate it. Shout out to you with the 5. Y'all coming through today. Thank you so much. Here it says, Black men never get away with the leading white women. Shout out to you. That's what I said. I was like, if y'all can, I would be curious of examples. We mentioned OJ. You're right. And that's why I said that story was so viral. Not only was it a public figure, it was a public figure that seemingly got off, but they made sure that he paid. Don't be clear. Like, that came back to haunt him. Here it says, yeah, I think I did that already. This one says Tether started swirling for minutes from slavery. Yeah, I did talk about that. I did talk about, if you want to talk about the origins of swirling, it is in the continent. I mean, it really is. The earliest examples of swirling and divesting, and by swirling and divesting, I literally mean Black women of African descent getting with white men specifically to socially climb. The earliest examples of that literally are on the African continent. They are. I mean, they are. I literally did a whole breakdown yesterday. If y'all want to go, we can name names. And actually, that's actually how slavery was able to expand. Slavery would not have been nearly as It would not have been nearly as successful as it became and nearly as expansive as it became if it was not for those interracial marriages. The European, slave owners and colonizers, they actually depended upon those interracial marriages in order to be able to gain access to a market. That's what those marriages were about. They're political alliances. So, you're right. That is an historical reality, Okay. So let me see. I know we've gone over a lot of information here. Oops. So now we're talking about, violence is bidirectionality. I talked a little bit about that before. And now here's an interesting chart. It says most IPV in the Black community is initiated by Black women. This is a case across the board, right? IPV, generally speaking, across races is initiated by women. But if we want to be specific to the Black community, because that's what we're talking about, here it says Black women killing Black men. The rate is 6 times higher than white women killing white men. Now that's an interesting stat. And, that's another interesting stat because, a lot of times these ladies like to, if we want, we don't need to compare race, but if we want to compare race and if we want to say, oh, well, why aren't these, what some ladies will do, why aren't these niggers more like these white men? If we want to do that, and if we want to, do the whole comparison game, then unfortunately, if you start comparing Black women to white women, it's not looking really good, So again, rates of IPV, violence, DV are just higher in the Black community, period. What we talked about, we looked at different reasons why, and when you actually look at policy, people who are, promoting policies, they don't highlight race as much as they highlight this systematic and issues of public health, right? Again, access to economic opportunities, access to good, clean food, access to clean air, access to clean water, actually, access to healthcare, access to mental health. And so they start to actually basically highlight the income and disparities in people's overall lifestyle, leading to what can now create a volatile environment, which ultimately tends to create more violent people who are under stress, people who are on the edge, and how that can start to lead to violence. And so that's what people talk about when they are generally dealing with issues of public policy, and then ultimately how DV shows up in these different communities. As I said before, you put any community, any race in an environment, and you strip them of resources, you strip them of economic opportunity, you strip them of access to healthy food and clean water and clean air, and the rates of stress and violence and health issues are likely to skyrocket for anybody, Okay. So now this is another thing that ladies don't like to talk about. Domestic violence research consistently reveals findings that challenges popular narratives. Women perpetuate intimate partner violence at rates equal to or exceeding men. According to findings in the Partner Abuse Journal, women perpetuate contact intimate partner violence at higher rates than men overall, 28.3% versus 21.6%, with female perpetration consistently matching or exceeding male perpetration across studies. So basically what it's saying is, according to that particular study journal, and that was also saw that, I can't think of another one, but I also saw that stat in another study that I covered off maybe a year or so ago. Basically what it's saying is that it found that women tend to initiate violence more. There were different theories around this. One of the theories I found interesting was basically, I think one was a kind of like bogus of just like, oh, well, if a woman felt like she was at risk, then she would hit him before she became at risk. Which to me, I'm just like, if you feel like you're going to be at risk for someone abusing you, then the last thing you want to do is going to want to piss him off. But they were trying to come up with theories as to why it appears as if women actually tend to be the perpetrators of violence, or they tend to be the ones who initiate a physically violent situation. They're trying to come up with theories, but at the end of the day, what the actually stats show is that women are the perpetrators of violence. Now, what happens is if a woman hits a man or a woman does something to a man, he hits back. By nature of men being naturally stronger physically, the damage that a man may do to a woman is likely to be worse, right? A woman slapping a man or punching him, right? She's 5'3" and the man's 6 foot. If he punches her back, it's not. That's not a fair match. It's not a fair match. It's not a fair match. You have some men who, because they were taught never put hands on the woman. They may have a woman slap, they may have a woman pull out their hair, they may have a woman take pots and do all kinds of stuff. And because they know that they're stronger, they won't hit back. And also because they know the law, generally speaking, is on the side of the woman, they won't hit back. But we're starting to live in an environment where men are being socialized, that men and women are equal. And that's really changing the dynamic. It's changing the dynamic. So here it says, now here's the bidirectionality is especially pronounced in Black communities. So when it talks about bidirectionality, it talks about men and women hitting each other. We already established that men tend to perpetuate violence, meaning they hit the first punch. Women are the first ones hit, slapping, kicking, punching, whatever. In some cases, stabbing. They're the ones doing it first. It is what it is. In most instances. Now, when it comes to bidirectionality, now they're hitting each other. It says it's the most pronounced in Black communities. This shows that bidirectional violence is reported in 50.9% of white, 49% of Hispanic, and 61.8% of Black cases. So again, bidirectionality is the highest in Black cases. And the female to male violence perpetuation, male to male violence perpetuation. So there it just kind of breaks it down. But it says Black women report the highest relative rates of IPV perpetuation among these racial groups. So really, okay, so what does this mean? Because I know we went over a lot of different stuff. So what this data shows us is some key things. First, it refutes any narrative suggesting that intimate partner violence is exclusively a male to female phenomenon, or that Black men are uniquely violent. Violence in intimate relationships is complex, bidirectional, and shaped by stress, poverty, substance use, and the cumulative trauma of systemic inequality. So basically, like I said, what this data is showing us when we looked at, we mentioned some of the different issues around poverty, substance abuse is another good thing, access to just opportunities, all of those different things. When you actually look at what frames and cultivates violence, you find that we can't really boil it down to, oh, just Black men are the most violent. Especially when we actually look at the rates of violence and find that women, not only do women perpetuate violence the most, comparatively speaking, Black women perpetuate violence more than any other race of women. Black women perpetuate violence more than Black men. And by perpetuate, I mean, they're the ones who are hitting first, kicking first, slapping first, doing whatever first. They are. So again, these are important conversations to have, because when we look at cases such as this, right, and you see Black women who are being unalived, we look at, Justin Fairfax and him going and just going 51-50 on his wife. We look at Shamar Elkins. We look at even the situation of the divested disaster, as I mentioned before. It's easy to frame all Black men or just all men as violent, or in some cases, it's easy to frame Black men as all violent and say, okay, go get you a white man, which is oftentimes what they do. But we never want to talk about the ways in which women actually engage in IPV or violence. We don't ever want to do that. And what the numbers are showing us, as uncomfortable as it is while, yes, there are absolutely men that perpetuate violence, women do so as well. And in many instances, women in personal, romantic environments, women hit first. They feel the first punch across the board, across races. But if you want to be comparative, and if you want to compare Black woman to white woman, for whatever reason, Black women actually hit first at a higher rate. Black women hit at the highest rate. They are, based upon that, have the highest rates of violence compared to other races of women. Right? So again, it refutes this idea that basically it's Jermaine's fault. That's just really what it is. It refutes this really kind of basic, stereotypical, very like first grade level analysis that it's just Jermaine's fault, right? Secondly, what it does is it emphasizes that while women do perpetuate violence, the lethal outcomes, homicide, disproportionately affects women, particularly Black women. The distinction between violence and lethal violence is crucial. Black women might perpetuate violence in a relationship, but she faces a fundamentally different risk of dying from her partner's actions, especially if the partner is white or if she is in economically precarious circumstances. So imagine this. Imagine, okay, you have, and like I said, I'm using the term Keisha just because y'all like to use that, just for an example's sake. And when I say Keisha, okay, for an example's sake, using a stereotype, let's say this is a Black woman who's with attitude. Let's say this is a Keisha who's swirling. She's, you know what I mean, living her best life, her soft life. She's doing her swirler voice. She got her swirler wig, all of that, right? Hard wig, soft life. But then you get Keisha mad. Keisha's with a Brad and she's mad. She hits Brad first. She hits Brad first. Brad doesn't know what to do. He hits her back. Brad is stronger than Keisha. So although Keisha, maybe she threw the first punch, by nature of Brad being stronger because he's a man, she ends up being unalive. He goes crazy, whatever. She may face more lethal results. And that's essentially what it's saying. It's saying while women, including Black women, why they tend to perpetuate violence more, they tend to experience homicide more when it comes to DV. And a lot of that may actually just be going down to the actual physical disparities that exist between men and women. Like I said, there's really no comparison. You take a woman and a man of an equal weight, of an equal height, dress size even, the man is still going to be more powerful than her because men have more muscle mass. Men are just naturally stronger. So just by nature of men being stronger than women, and if they're in a fisticuffs scenario, generally speaking, a man can do a lot more damage than a woman. Now, I know that there's cases, we are used to those cases of, the 10 couples, the class of 10 couples, right? In the scenario where you got a little lean Black man and a beautiful BBW he's with, and she can hurt, she could put a hurting on him. So we are used to those scenarios, right? But I'm just saying, generally speaking, men are stronger than women. And generally speaking, men, if they want to, would be able to, in most instances, if they want to inflict real physical harm on their lady, they can physically with their arms. And so that's what it's showing, right? We can't summarize all of this on, it's Jermaine's fault, or in even any instance that, men are just inherently just always most violent. That's not necessarily what this data is actually showing us. So we have to actually look at the environments that are surrounding the couple to come to an accurate understanding of what's causing the violence. And then secondly, we recognize that women actually, because they tend to be the ones that initiate violence the most in these relationships, yet and still, by nature of them being just physically weaker, even if they do initiate violence, even if they do all these different things, they tend to have higher rates of homicide at the rate of IPV than men. And I think some of that could just go down to just pure physicality, honestly. You said there are some cases that cannot box. Stop. So, so, I mean, that's it. The article, it gets really deep. If you guys want to go and look at some more information, it gets really deep. And then here it talks about, again, the disparity is structural, not cultural, economic inequality, residential segregation, healthcare, discriminatory policing, racist evaluation. These are all different things, even firearms, social isolation. These are all things that kind of would need to be taken into consideration, particularly those who are advocating for policy. But if you guys want to get really deep dive in that, you can. But I wanted to frame this conversation. I know we went over a lot of information and a lot of what may seem like random, and yet in some cases very much connected. I believe information that's connected and stats that are connected. And again, when we go back to this basic question of, are Black women really safer with white men or with Black men? That's not necessarily the case. As I mentioned before, we see that unfortunately in cases of interracial relationships where it does devolve into violence, white men tend to unalive Black women more than Black men tend to unalive Black women. That's just what the stats show. Also, when it comes to rates of IPV between Black women and Black men, Black women actually initiate violence towards Black men more, right? And so a lot of this information actually, it turns this whole conversation on its head, by framing Black men as the primary perpetrators, and even by framing just men in general as these perpetrators and these women as innocent victims. The reality is, like I said, women, unfortunately, have oftentimes much more of a bigger role to play in DV than is oftentimes alleged or oftentimes discussed. They just tend to be at the receiving end of homicide, like I said, for many reasons that I mentioned, some of it also just being down to disparities in strength. Now, I think it's important to note too, as I mentioned before, that again, when we're talking about DV or IPV, these are all, generally speaking, rare scenarios. It's incredibly rare that someone actually is going to get with another individual and end up being unalived around the 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock news. That still, by and large, is something that it's rare, right? Like, how many of you guys have actually seen someone? I know some of y'all have. How many of you guys have actually seen someone in front of you being shot or unalived or whatever? But with that said, it's important to understand when we're talking about it, what's actually going on, so that we can actually guard against a lot of narratives and just a lot of false information around what's actually going on in Black relationships, what's going on in interracial relationships, what's going on in relationships, period. Women initiate violence towards men, period, of all races. Unfortunately, women initiate violence towards men the most. Black women, compared to all races of women, initiate violence the most to Black men. They do. That's what it is. When Black women get with white men, the data suggest that should the relationship devolve to something violent, God forbid, and something even lethal, that he's more likely to do that with a Black woman than a white woman. That's what it shows. And again, I'm framing it specifically around conversations as it relates to who's safer for Black women. Now, with that said, I think if we actually just get away, if we move away from propaganda and start to use basic common sense, when it comes to actually, choosing somebody and dating somebody, then we wouldn't have to have these conversations. Like I said before, of course I love Black love, and I will always support Black love, and I will always support Black men getting with Black women under, if they're healthy. But, if you get with somebody who's good and healthy and a nice person, and he's of your race or outside of your race, then we're cool. It just gets weird when people go online and do this whole, when they do weird stuff, it's like, oh, well, unless he has this car or this house, or unless he this and that, when you start acting weird and you do weird things, that's when you have weird results. But if you're just if people are just normal, if ladies are just normal with how they go about actually trying to find love, and they are realistic, in my opinion, about finding love and finding a person, then we don't have to have these conversations. We don't have to sit here and try to use race as a determining factor on whether or not somebody is good. You would just know somebody's good because they're a good person. And it also helps when you're a good person too. If you're a crusty person and you expecting to get somebody good, then that's the problem. Don't be a crusty person. You know what I mean? Let me see how to play this real quick. Because I had somebody share this with me in my server, and I was like, what? This is so weird. Let me see. This, for example, the bigger issue to me when it comes to a lot of these conversations is because women are choosing, some ladies they're promoting the idea that women need to choose based upon this kind of BS. And let me show you, for example.
If you're living with a man and you guys live here, you're living with the provider. If you're living with a man and you guys live here, you're living with the loser. If you're living with a man and you guys live here, you're living with the provider. I repeat, if you're living with a man and you guys live here, you're living with a loser. So ladies, now that we got that straight, what type of man are you living with? A provider or a loser?
So, like I said, the bigger problem in all of this to me is when you got people who are looking to date based upon that kind of silly information. That was ignorant. Also, to me, hashtag, if you ever want to tell how broke a woman is, this is how you know. This is how you tell whether or not a woman is broke. What's going on, Dr. Thunder? It's good to see you. Good to see you, Dr. Thunder. Also, shout out to you also with the 149. I wanted to make sure I acknowledge you. Shout out to you with the 149 on the super sticker. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. But that's how to tell. That's how to tell if somebody is broke. That's how you can tell if somebody is broke. Because somebody who grew up with a nice house, just in a house like that, like that's not the determining factor on getting with a man, because they've already had that experience. So it's not anything special to them. What they're actually looking for is a good person. They're looking with somebody that they can share their life with. They're looking with somebody who actually has, husband or whatever material. But part of the problem is that you got ladies going online following this kind of foolishness. They're just looking for somebody that got a house, looking for somebody that has whatever material benefits. And yes, you are more likely to find it in the white community, partially because there's just more white folks start there. Also because white folks still generally hold majority of the wealth. So if you're a woman if you are driven by the materialism, you're putting yourself at odds. You're putting yourself in a situation to not actually look for a good person, to not look at a person that has character, that has qualities, that has husband material. You're looking for a sponsor. You're looking for a sponsor. And we already know that, relationships revolving sex work, relationships revolving sugar baby, sugar dad, that stuff isn't safe, period. It's not safe. It's not safe. So I'm saying a lot of these situations, I feel like if ladies were just encouraged to pick based upon real good qualities, Black men, or even if he's not a Black man, just real good basic qualities, then that could eliminate a lot of the chaos that be going on. But one issue that we see is that ladies actually just don't know how to pick. And that can open up larger issues about, challenges with the family, whether or not a woman actually grew up with a father, or just healthy understandings of men. If she grew up with healthy examples of what relationships look like most Black women they weren't raised to be wives. They weren't raised to even know what that looks like. They were raised to be workers. They were raised to be single moms, but they weren't raised to even know how to vet for a man, let alone be with one. So a lot of just kind of figuring out, they don't even know what to look for. Okay, they marry Pookie, and then the Pookie ends up crashing out, unfortunately, or walking away. And they go with a Brad, and they haven't dealt with whatever issues they got going on. They go with a Brad and try to get the soft life and try to get a house or whatever by using their divested swirler voice or their hard wig. And it still ends up biting them in the butt. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying. Like, a lot of these issues would be mitigated. We wouldn't have to have these dumb conversations. Are you safest with white men versus Black men? Are you the soft life, hard work, soft life? We wouldn't have to have these conversations if women actually knew how to choose. And I do think that that's something that I don't even necessarily understand. A lot of women weren't even set up for success. I think that's more of an issue with the upbringing with the parents, and those are things that need to be addressed on that level. But if you're a woman or someone who didn't grow up, if you didn't grow up in an opportunity where you had anybody showing you, had anybody teaching you what healthy is, what good looks like, then you're likely going to have to seek that out, So anyways, y'all, we went over a lot of information. I appreciate you guys who were showing support. I appreciate you members. I appreciate all y'all who were showing love on showed some love on the super chat. I really appreciate y'all. I know we went over a lot of information, but I thought it was relevant. Because, like I said, we're going to start to see more conversations around. I would not be surprised if we see more conversations around Black femicide. If we see more conversations around just a lot of the propaganda. And then what you'll start to do is you'll start to see swirlers and divestors. They'll start posting more examples of Black men unaliving Black women. They'll just post it and be like, well, why aren't y'all talking about this? That's what they're going to do.
Why don't you talk about that? They'll do that. Now, they're not going to post examples of Black women doing things to Black kids or even men, but whatever. But they're going to use that as a way to traffic and say, see, Black men are the most violent. And what I'm not saying is that I do think that it's important to deal with IPV and violence that happens to the Black community. I do think it's important to deal with that. I'm just saying if we're going to have that conversation, then we need to be honest about what's actually going on in its entirety. We don't get to frame Black men as the most violent who are out here unaliving Black women at the highest rate. We don't get to do that because, one, the numbers don't support that. And then also we don't get to remove women from that conversation when we recognize that women across the board, across races, actually initiate violence first towards men. They do. They do. You know what I mean? So that's what I have for today. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. Replay gang, y'all can check out the replay gang. I might just have to do like I have to think about this. I was thinking of doing just like a recap of literally just the stats, since I know this was like kind of a longer live, but we had a lot to go over. Y'all let me know what y'all think in the comment section. What do y'all think about this whole thing? What do you think even about some of the different viral stories you've seen of Black men unaliving Black women? These talk about these murder suicides, the Ashlee Jenae saga, the Swirler saga, Justin Fairfax. What do y'all think about all of that? Shamar Elkins, we went over some of that. I would just be curious to hear some of what y'all got to say. So let me know down in the comment section. Shout out to you guys, members, also for showing support. Shout out to you. You said, correct you. I'm trying to think if I got anything else. Oh, also, if you guys haven't already, be sure to grab your copy of It's Not Jermaine's Fault. Be sure to grab your copy of that. Available now on Amazon. To my understanding, I think it's not available on Amazon. I need to double check. If it's not, then it'll be soon. So circle back on that. Also, I'm trying to think what else. I don't even remember. I've been in here a long time, so I'm starting to fade. But y'all, this is a good conversation. Thanks for hanging out. And just stay tuned. Be sure to hit the notification bell. Join me on channel membership if you want. And also follow me on Substack, where that's the article that I was reading. You can catch the full article along with the sources there. For those of you guys who want to check the sources. Not Grok, okay? Not you going and asking Wikipedia or asking AI, which is referencing Reddit, literally Reddit sites and things like that. But if you want to actually just go and look in the studies yourself and reading them yourself and the numbers themselves, and you find the sources, you can do that. I have that referenced in my article. So thank you guys so much for hanging out. I'm just going to end with some of the videos that I started with just for fun. And we'll talk later, okay? Bye.
If you do not want your chances of getting killed to increase, you don't deal with men. Too often, women and even men, they always want to go back to separatism to not look at the bigger picture. Your lifespan is instantly and dramatically going to shorten the second you allow a man into your home. You allow a man into your life. This could be because he's gonna or this could be just simply because you're stressed, your cortisol is high, you are sacrificing a lot of things, you're self-sacrificing, and so therefore you will not be able to you have to abandon yourself to make sure that you have this man around, and then you're going to degrade slowly. Also, I can't even believe that there are people that actually believe social media relationships. I feel as though if you are a person that longs and yearns for a relationship that you see on social media and you don't know them, and you're creating parasocial relationship goals based off of videos and pictures, no shade, you need to touch some grass. No shade, you need to go to therapy. This is not real. Okay, this shit is not real. This is a form for people to sell you a dream in order for you to have a sense of validation, in order for you to view things so that way you could feel inadequate and to make you feel like something's wrong with you.
Black men, I'm just checking in. Y'all quiet in the mug about the 8 children that was unalived by their black father in Louisiana. Y'all were so quick to talk about Ashlee Jenae being unalived by a, YT man, allegedly, because that hasn't come out to be proven yet. You know what I'm saying? However, what about this man right here who went on a unaliving spree of his 8 freaking children? I have yet to see a lot of y'all problematic men come out to address this situation. And I honestly know why y'all don't address situations like this. I honestly know why. Because you know darn well that it makes BLK men look bad, right? Y'all will comment on anything that makes a BLK woman look bad. But when it comes to a black man doing something horrible, oh, that's not all. Don't generalize. But then when there's one BLK woman who does something, oh, these black bees and all this. Come on now, bro. Why y'all ain't speaking up? Now what? A whole bunch of y'all problematic dudes that's on these social media platforms. Y'all got something crazy to say every day, but you won't talk about these evil BLK men out here that be out here unaliving children and the women. Y'all don't like speaking up on stuff like that. Rest in peace to the children. The father who did this is no longer here. He's probably in down under. That's all I have to say.
You know that Shamar Elkins, the perpetrator of the massacre in Shreveport, Louisiana, was actually in divorce proceedings with his wife to get separation, and their first court date was supposed to be yesterday, so Monday, the day before the day after the shooting. He had 4 children with that woman. He was going to be in divorce proceedings speaking about child support the next day, which is what led to this shooting. You can't tell me this is one of the main things that they tell you. He literally killed those people. He killed his family because he didn't have the funds to take care of them. And he felt like this would have been game over for him. He was 31 with 8 kids. He killed 8 kids. One of the kids wasn't even his. He went for every child in that house. One of those children was the cousin, his nephew. He literally killed his nephew in the sake of just killing every child possible. He shot the women and he shot all the children because he was supposed to be in divorce proceedings the next day. And that's why you don't see black men talking about this. That is why you don't see a lot of black men talking about this, because they feel like it's a shame on black men. But really, it's not even that. Sexual discipline is something that needs to be taught much more extensively throughout the community. And somebody in our community will shame somebody for being gay, but won't shame 8 kids. Won't shame 8 kids with 3 different women. He was already on child support with 1 woman, and his wife that he had 4 more children with was in the process of leaving him, and they were going to go to court the next day. That's why he tried to flee too. That's why he tried to flee. Y'all gonna talk about mental illness. He was gonna be in divorce proceedings the next day, paying for 4 more kids after he's already on child support on the hook for 2 of them. And that's why he got a new wife, but he had different baby mamas and stuff, and he had 8 kids. I need y'all to hear it. That just pissed me clean off looking it up.
Tell us more about the hotel staff from what you know based on your source.
So my source told me that Joe is a frequent visitor of Zanzibar, and he is well known by hotels, staff, and the people. So he has frequented Zanzibar. And my source said they were arguing about him cheating on her. He would leave the villa to go to other women at night.
And other